Hi guys, my name is Ram and today we'll be learning about GitHub in this GitHub tutorial. So in software development, we need to make sure that we are able to keep and manage our source code of our software properly without having a lot of issues, right? So we make use of a lot of version control systems. Now, one of the most important version control systems that is the most popular one is Git, and likewise GitHub, which is a trailing service that works with it. So a lot of people generally have the question, what is GitHub? And we are going to answer that question and help you guys learn how to start using GitHub in this particular tutorial.
Before we get started, I want to introduce you to Great Learning Academy, a free initiative by Great Learning. You can access over 200 plus courses with 1,000 plus hours of free content on trending high demand domains. Absolutely free. Register now to complete the course and get your free certificate of completion. Check out the link in the description of the video below. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, I want to request you to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notifications bell so that you don't miss out on any new updates or video releases from Great Learning. If you enjoyed this video, show us some love and like this video. Knowledge increases by sharing, so make sure you share this video with your friends and colleagues. And make sure to comment on the video for any queries or suggestions and I will respond to them.
All right, so let's look at the topics we're going to be covering in this particular tutorial. So let me bring up the agenda. So here are the topics. So first we'll be understanding what is version control and why is it important. So we'll be understanding the principle of version control itself and why do we need it in our software development processes. And then we'll talk about what is GitHub actually. We'll discuss Git and we'll discuss the differences between Git and GitHub. We'll be learning how to access GitHub. We'll be touring GitHub and we'll be working with GitHub doing various different things like, committing, creating branches and learning about pull requests. All right. So that's our agenda. So guys, now let us understand what is version control as a principle and why is it so important when it comes to software development. All right. To understand this, I think we need to deep dive and understand a very simple example, right? So right now, it doesn't matter if you're working or if you're a student. Let's take an example of a student because all of us were students in past, one way or the other. So this student can be a school student or a college student, right? So they're working on a machine learning project that basically allows them to make images a lot more clear, right? So that's their project. So right now, they're in their final semester or their final year and they have to give a review to their professor or they have to have the review taken by the professor for their project. Right. So this particular student has made his project and it has 80% efficacy, right? So it works pretty well, but it has an 80% efficacy. So it can only work 80% of the time. 20% of the time, it does not work very well, right? So what he decides to do is he actually decides to make it 90%. Now, the reason for this is the professor said that he would give a higher grade to anyone who could come up with a 90% efficacy. So he wanted to get a higher grade, right? So what did he do? He basically decided to make changes in his code so that it would increase his efficacy. Now, the problem was that there was only one day left before the review. So he had only one day to do all of this. So what he decided to do was he basically took his code and he started writing on it. And he made the changes. It took him around 12 hours, but he was successful. He finished writing his code and it ran for the first time. But then when he tried running it the second time to make sure it was running properly, he got a lot of errors and he could not figure out why the errors were appearing again and again. And he tried again, running it again, and he tried making changes, but nothing would work anymore, right? And his code just would not work at all. So now the situation was there was only like 6 hours left to the review and he had to basically show something to the professor. But what he had done earlier was he had taken his original piece of code and written on top of it. He had not done a very crucial thing you are supposed to do when you're making a final year project or a final semester project, right? So that is having a backup, which is very important in a lot of different cases. And he did not have one. So right now he has to go to the professor and show it to him. The review begins and then he shows him the code and then tells him about how it was running perfectly fine one day before, but then he tried making changes to it. Now, the professor kind of understood his situation, but he still did not give him a good grade. He did not even give him an 80% efficacy good grade. He just gave him a passing grade, right? Because that's how he is. So here the student loses out a lot. Now, how could this situation have been improved upon? So one thing the student could have done is create a different backup, right? He could have had a backup for this. And let's take this example. When the student has a backup which runs perfectly fine, and he decides to make a change into his file to increase the 90% efficacy, and again this time he sees that there is an issue and it's not working fine, but the review, he can also show the 80% efficacy file as well as a 90% efficacy file. You can tell the professor, see, I tried the 90% thing, it did not work, but I still have the 80% thing. And if the professor likes it, then he might as well give him a really good grade. So here his purpose is fulfilled, getting a great grade as well as, not losing out on anything. And what we learn out of this situation is that he had a backup, right? And in a way, he had two versions of this particular software. So let's take an example where he has 3 pieces of code or 4 pieces of code, where he has 4 different versions for 4 different things, right? So all of them have to be maintained in separate folders under separate name so that he can keep a track of them and make sure that he's not overwriting any of them. So the thing that he's doing over here is he's manually controlling them, and all of them are different versions. So you could call this, in a way, version controlling. So this particular student was trying to version control his software, right? And that is what version control at principle really is. If you look at the definition and everything, you will see that version control is basically the act of controlling certain versions of a product or a project or a software code, right? These days, when you make software, right, when software is developed, it is not developed with the mindset that there will only be one piece of code. You don't do that anymore because that's a monolithic idea. It's an antiquated idea because these days you always try to develop software in small chunks rather than one piece of code. And when you do this, and you keep on improving upon those smaller chunks also, you have so many different files to take care of and track. Now, if you went ahead and followed the model of the student of having different folders to keep track of different files, it could take you ages. And you don't have a proper system to search through them also. So manually doing it is very tedious also, right? So that's why we make use of certain tools to do this for us. We'll talk about them. Let's finish off what is version control, right? So when you have so many different pieces of code, you need to clearly make sure they're structurally organized and, maintained. And this is very important because if you don't do that, especially in a big organization, then there can be a lot of chaos really fast. And that's where we try to implement the philosophy of version control, right? So there is a need to organize all of this code and all of its different versions in it. This is where the philosophy of version control comes in, as it is the practice of managing and storing different versions of a source code, right? Okay. Now, this is especially the case with larger companies that have multiple projects and multiple teams working on it. So if you take the example of Google or Amazon, they have so many different teams working on so many different projects. So they might even have thousands of developers working on thousands of different projects. And when you have so many developers, so many projects, there are bound to be hundreds or thousands of files that are basically different versions of the code, right? And you need to store it and, manage it. So that's why we need to make use of version control. So now we've understood what is version control, and we basically have an idea about why do we need it, right? So let's take this example again. Let me show you with the company. Here, let's say that this is a company that is as big as Amazon, but let's not name it. It's a generic company. And this generic company has generic team A, generic team B, generic team C. And all of these teams have different projects in their hand. Team A has A1, A2, A3. Team B has similarly B1, B2, 3. And C has C1, C2, C3. So they have 3 projects of each of them that they have to manage by themselves. And each of the teams has specific people assigned to these projects. So they do work on these projects, but you can see how quickly it multiplies. So let's say on A1, 2 people are working, A2, 2 people are working, A3, 2 people are working. And both of them have to work on different features within that project itself, because they won't be working on the same feature, obviously. So A1 will have A1.2 and A1.1, and A2 will have A2.1 and A2.2, just to clarify how it will be divided, right? So you will have so many people working on so many different parts of code that it is very, very important to make sure that you're controlling all of these things and managing and storing this properly. And this is where our version control tools come in. And that's when we'll start talking about what a version control system is. So in brief, before we start the part, version control systems basically allow us to manage and maintain all of these different versions. All right, guys, now that we've understood what is version control as a principle and why is it so important, let us move on to talk about the tools and services that help us to do so. Now, one of the most popular and one of the most widely used services and tools out there are Git and GitHub. They work together and you're usually using them in conjunction with each other. But before we talk about Git, I want to tell you guys about GitHub, because GitHub is the title of this particular tutorial and I want to help you guys understand what GitHub is, right? So we know that there is a need to maintain and store our source code in a structured manner. And we need to do this for a lot of different versions, because each code can have different pieces of lines of code that change it in a beneficial way or not. And at least we need to keep a track of all of these things, right? As we had discussed earlier. So why or where do we do it? So how do we store it? Do we do it in our own laptops, or do we do it in our local servers that we have put up? Well, we make use of GitHub, right? So what is GitHub over here? So GitHub is basically a place where you can go and store all the different versions of your code and then manage it, right? And then maintain it and then view the history of whatever changes have been made whenever you want to, right? So it's like a remote server that you don't have access to physically, and you're storing all the important assets and all the pieces of code you have over there. So it is a cloud-based service. What does cloud-based service means? It means that someone has created a server remotely that is available to people through the internet. So it's a service that is being used through the internet. So that's why when we talk about GitHub, we talk about how it is a supporting platform that allows people to, or allows software developers to come together and collaboratively create software from anywhere in the world if they have access to the internet, right? So you are able to push and pull code from this remote particular server because you have access to the internet, right? That's why it's a cloud-based service. Now, what it does is it basically maintains the code, it manages the code, and it basically allows you to view any history of changes made to the code. And there are a lot more other things we'll be talking about, like we need to understand what is Git for that first. Okay, now that we've seen the definition of what GitHub is and you guys have an understanding of what GitHub is, we can move on and talk about what is a repository. But one thing before we talk about what is a repository, now GitHub is a really useful tool because once you store your code on it, you're basically able to connect your GitHub to other tools to automate the whole software development process. So if you ever want to automate the whole process, where the developer himself does not need to take the code and create a project out of it, create a software out of it using external libraries and external frameworks and everything, you can just have an automated script do it for you. And GitHub has very good integration, or at least very good support for that integration, that allows you to do so. All right. That was a good tidbit for you. Now, what is a repository? So when we're talking about storing our code on GitHub, we are talking about storing our code on repositories on GitHub. Why do we have repositories and why can't we directly store it? Well, you are storing directly. It's just that you're dividing it up in different classifications. Like how you would have different folders for different projects, right? On your local system, you might have a project folder for maths, and you might have a project folder for English. Similarly, you have repositories on GitHub. You have a repository for your food development app. You have a repository for your e-commerce app. So you have two different repositories that store the project files for your particular project, right? So a repository in Git is used to store all the files relevant to a project. So a food delivery app repository will have all the project files that are required for this particular app to run. It will have all the .java files, and it will have all the libraries, and it will have all the .test files. So it will have everything, right? And you can think of it like a project folder where you will be storing all the configuration files, code files, meta files that are necessary for your code to run, right? So that is what a repository is. So it is a storage location for relevant files. You can create a repository on GitHub representing a project, and you can initialize a local repository on your system and connect both of them. So what I'm talking about here is, when you go to GitHub, you can basically create a repository, or you can tell GitHub that you want a repository, and then come back to your local system, that is your laptop or your PC, and you can initialize a local repository, which is basically taking a folder in your own laptop or PC and telling Git that I want this to be my local repository and that to be my remote repository. And then you can connect both of them. And then when you make changes, you can easily push these changes on there and pull new code from there to your local system, right? So we'll discuss that in detail when we're talking about what Git is. Right now, I just want to make sure that it is clear what GitHub is and what is a repository. GitHub is a cloud-based service that allows us to store and maintain code, and repositories are basically a type of classification that allows us to have relevant files in relevant places, right? So it's like having project folders. All right, guys, now let us discuss the differences between Git and GitHub. I'll first take you through what Git is so that we don't have any sort of confusion when we're discussing Git versus GitHub. All right. Okay. Now, we know GitHub is the remote platform where we're storing our code, right? Remote server. Right. So what happens locally? Because what is the whole process of software development? So our whole process of software development is, a person writing software, making changes to it, and then putting it in a storage location, right? So what is the initial steps, right? So in the initial steps is where your Git comes in. So Git is something that is used locally. So if you go by the definition, so Git is a global information tracker, right? It is an open source tool, and it is a distributed version control system or a source code management system. So what it does is, its main job is to track changes that you've made so far. So if you have a project called food delivery app and you have a file called index.html where you have the main page for your food delivery app, right? You won't use HTML. So let's say you have your food delivery website, and the first page you have is index.html where you have all the things that are necessary for your main page, whatever. So on your main page, you decide to make changes to it, right? So who keeps a track of these changes? So you made a change for the first time, you made a change for the second time, and who informs GitHub about all of these changes, about all of these different versions that you've had so far, right? So that is being done by Git. So Git is a tool that basically tracks any and all changes that you've made. So whatever changes you make, and once you commit them, Git will have a record that you've committed these changes. All right. So about a Git a little bit. So it was developed by a group of Linux kernel developers, right? So if you know Linus Torvald, the person who came up with Linux kernel itself, was the one responsible and behind Git. Now, the reason they made Git was because they did not find any good version control tool back in 2005. So they just made one that is Git, right? And it was open source. That means it was freely available for everyone to use, even commercially. So that's what Git is. Now, let us get and discuss what is Git versus GitHub. So again, with Git, it is a version control system that allows the user to keep track of all the changes made to a code. Whereas GitHub is a cloud-based service used to store all the different versions of a code in different repositories. All right. So that's the difference between Git and GitHub. Git is basically going to be making sure of all the changes we've made, keeping track of them, allowing us to push our code from our local system onto our remote servers. Whereas GitHub is basically a remote server that is used to store all of these different pieces of code. Okay. So I hope the distinction is pretty clear between these two. Git will be used locally and GitHub will be used online with your, basically used to store all of your code. So this is the difference between Git and GitHub. So now let's kind of get into how it works, right? So let's say we have one particular project. It's a food delivery website and there are two developers working on this website. Right. So they both work on different functions of the website, but they have a certain dependency. Let's say the developer 2 has to wait for developer 1 to finish his work first. So how does it all happen? So developer 1 starts writing the code on his own system and he starts making use of Git to keep track of all of these changes he's made so far in his code. And once he's done making all the changes and he's satisfied with his part in the project, he basically takes that code and pushes it onto GitHub so that it can be stored on GitHub. Now that it is stored on GitHub, developer 2 can take this new piece of code on GitHub and download it onto his own system. Once he downloads it onto his own system, he can work with it. He had a little bit of dependency and now he can start working with it. So he starts writing his code. He uses Git on his laptop to make a note of all the changes he's made. And then once he's satisfied with whatever he's done, he's going to push it back onto GitHub, right? So now you have two different versions of the software, the first version by developer 1 and the second version by developer 2. Now this cycle can repeat, or you can have a different variations of this cycle where the developer 2 himself basically pulls the code again, makes changes and then pushes it back again. So you have 3 versions. Then developer 1 pulls that code onto his system and then, basically makes his changes and pushes it back onto GitHub. So you have 4 versions. Similarly, you'll keep on having different versions of your code and you'll store them on GitHub. So this is how Git and GitHub work together. If you talk about a few features of Git, you have system compatibility. So Git works with a lot of different systems. Like if you want to use Git without GitHub, you want to use some other cloud-based storage place, then you can do that. It's highly collaborative. As we discussed so far, you can work with a lot of different developers together on this. And it is very, very fast. So when it comes to replicating the code from online servers to local systems, it is one of the most fast tools available. It outpaces all the other version control systems. And it is a distributed system and it is a reliable system. So it's a distributed system. That means there's no central server for this. It is distributed among different servers. Then it is very reliable. That means that you can always access your code at any time. And there's a good layer of security, as you know who's making the changes, when he's making the changes, and only authorized personnel can make those changes. So there's a good layer of security also. So these are the different features of Git. So guys, I had told you about the features of Git, and I've told you what Git is, Git versus GitHub, and I told you what really happens when you're doing Git versus and you're using Git and GitHub together. Now I want to give you guys a brief about how the Git lifecycle happens, which is basically me telling you what will happen when you dive deeper into actually working with Git, right? So the first thing you do is on your system, you basically assign a working directory in your mind. Now, what is that? You're basically assigning a folder on your desktop or whatever, wherever, and you're thinking of that place as the place where you want to write your code. So that is the first step, thinking of a working directory. Working directory is basically a folder. The second step is initializing. So initializing is basically the step in which you tell the local tool, that is Git, that you want this particular folder to be recognized as a local repository, right? Which is separate than a remote repository. This is a local repository on your system, and Git recognizes it. So in the initialization step, then comes the next step, that is making the changes or writing the code or whatever. So if you want to write new pieces of code, or if you just want to make some changes, you do that. And after that, you have the staging process. So in staging process, you are telling Git that, listen, Git, I have these particular files I want you to keep a track of. And if you have 3 files, and in staging, you mention those 3 files, Git will keep a track of all the changes you've made so far to those 3 files, right? And once it starts making a track of all of these changes, you can go ahead and commit these changes. So committing means once you're satisfied in that particular cycle about what you want to do with the code. So let's say you wanted to add 5 lines of code to your project, and you did that. And you stage that particular file, and then you committed the changes. So you basically save the changes. So Git tracks them, but to save the changes and create a clear demarcation between one file, one version, and another version, you commit those changes, right? So previously it was 1.0 version. Now that you've committed the changes, it is 1.1. So you've made the changes. Now your next step is to basically push the new piece of code from local repository onto the remote repository, which is on GitHub. All right. So this is the basic process of Git lifecycle. So you can repeat it from the staging part. You don't need to create a working directory again and initialize again when you're pulling the code. So pulling means you're going to GitHub, you're finding that particular piece of file that you want to pull onto your system, onto your local repository, and you can start working with it, and you just need to stage again and commit them again. Okay, so this particular part is handled by Git, and this particular part is handled by GitHub. So guys, this is the Git lifecycle. All right, guys, we have seen so far what version control is, why is it so important. We've seen what GitHub is, what is a repository. We've seen what Git is. We've seen the difference between Git and GitHub. We've seen Git's features. We've seen the life cycle of Git. We've understood pretty much what Git and GitHub are theoretically, but we haven't done anything practically so far. Now, since this is a tutorial for us to understand what GitHub is, I'm only going to be concentrating on that going onwards, right? So first, what we're going to do, we are going to be learning how to access GitHub, right? So this is sort of pretty easy, right? So all you need to do is just type in github.com. So this is what we are going to do now. All right, guys, now I've opened up the browser over here. I've opened it up in incognito so that I don't log into my account directly, because I want to tell you guys how you can go ahead and create your own account. So the first thing you guys need to do is just type in github.com and press enter. And if you just don't feel like typing in the github.com part, just type in GitHub on Google, right? And the first link you see, you probably have to click that link. Yes. So this is the link you have to click if you're doing it from Google. And you can do this on your phones also, as well as your laptops. Now, let's see over here what happens when you type in github.com. We'll see the main screen and then tell you guys how to sign in. All right, so when you go to github.com, this is what you're going to see, guys. So this is the landing website, and it basically tells you about why GitHub, team, enterprise, options, exploring options, marketplace, and pricing. So let us go ahead and click on sign up over here. So you can either click on sign up over here or click on sign up for GitHub over here. So we're going to use the sign up over here. And if you already have an account, you just sign in. But once you click on sign up, you can go ahead and click on create. Yeah, you can basically create your account. So we're going to give a username. So you guys can also give some kind of username. So I'm just going to give John Doe 78. Let's see if this is all right. If it's good to go, it will tell you this particular username is available. Sometimes a lot of usernames will not be available. Now, the next thing you need to give, guys, is your email address, johndoe78@gmail.com, right? So this has not already been taken. This is not my Gmail address, but this is to show you guys. And then you can go ahead and give it a password. A good, strong password is always recommended. Now, I'm not going to tell you guys what my password here is, but let's let it be. And you can always choose to have occasional product updates, announcements. If you don't want that, you can just uncheck this, come down, verify account. So this is basically to make sure you are a real person. So you click on verify, and you choose whatever they ask you. They're asking Spiral Galaxy, just choose a Spiral Galaxy. They have different puzzles for different times. And then you can go ahead and click on create account, right? So that's the process. And after you do this, you have to log into your mail address and click on verify your account. That's about it. Once you verify your account, you can just come back and use the username and password you had created for yourself and log in into GitHub. All right. So as you guys can see, I've already been logged in. All we need is a verification process. Okay. So guys, that was our process of accessing GitHub. Now you can do this on your website, or what you guys can do is you can do this on the app also. So you have an option to basically download the GitHub app and you can view all your repositories from there. But it has limited use. It's not as functional as the website. Okay. Okay, guys, now we will go ahead and familiarize ourselves with the GitHub dashboard and everything. I will basically be touring everything out. Okay. That is before we go and do the actual practical stuff. So let me take you guys to the website. And this is my own account. As you guys can see, there's a lot of things over here, but don't worry, we'll go through all of it one by one. So generally, when you open up your first account, this is not all the things you're going to see. So this part is going to remain. So if you go to github.com and you're logged in, this part is generally going to remain empty, or there's going to be news over here, right? There's not going to be a lot much else over here because you have not created your repositories yet. So let me clear out what each part of this dashboard is about. So let us start from the leftmost corner. So this is our home button. So if you just click on it, it will take you to home page, which is this page itself. And over here, you have the option to search or jump to a specific repository. It can be your own repository, it can be someone else's repository. And here you have all the repositories you have created so far. Now, this part, left-hand side part, is basically all about your repositories. Now, as we have understood before, repositories are basically storage classifications for our GitHub. Like we could have different projects, we have different repositories, and you guys can see over here for project A, I have a separate repository, and for food app, I have a separate repository. For Alpine image deploy, I have a separate repository, and all of these repositories have their own pieces of code, right? And their own unique URL identifying each of them. So this is where you have all the different repositories, and you can just go ahead and click on new to create a new repository as well. We will see that when we are creating a repository. For now, let's go back and look at other things that are there on Git. All right, so over here, guys, you have another option while this loads up, that is working with the team, and you can go ahead and create an organization. Now, this is important for an actual organization. As an individual, you can be satisfied with whatever options you have with just repositories, but with organization, you need a larger, scope of collaboration. So for that purpose, to make it a little bit more easier on yourself, you can always go ahead and click on create an organization, right? So if you're working for Amazon, or if you're working for a company like Big Basket or something, those companies will have their own organizations where people internal in those organizations can access those particular repositories that they have access to. All right. So that's about this. Now coming over here, as you guys can see, these are basically my notifications regarding my repositories, what has happened so far. So as you guys can see, a few people have forked my repositories, right? So we have Pankaj Maran, which has starred my repository. So that means that, he liked it and he has starred my repository. Now, if you come down, we can see Ekan, he has forked one of my repositories. And what does forking mean? So forking is a process in which you basically copy someone else's repository onto your own account. So as you guys can see, this particular repository, that is Remy-code, that is my username, /simple-web app. So this is my repository. Now it has a certain, bit of code. So it is HTML code, very simple. Now, what this person did was he basically copied my repository and put it on his own account. So as you guys can see, for him, it became Ekan Singh 1 simple web app. So this is what happened when he forked it. So you can fork other people's repositories if they have given you access to do so. And you can make changes, and you can, once you made changes, you can even suggest them to the original poster or original person who's created the original repository, right? And you can always go ahead and start them. This lets them know, that their repository is nice. Okay, and on the right hand side, you guys can see some bit of news, and you have an option to explore repositories, right? So we'll consider this later. For now, let's go on to the top tab. So here again, as I said, we have the option to search and jump to other people's repositories, and then you have the option for pull requests. Now, what exactly are pull requests? So I'm going to give you a brief over here, but we're going to learn about this a little later, more in detail. So pull requests are basically when you have your main repository and multiple people working on those repository, they are all not authorized to basically make changes to it directly, or at least make changes to the main branch directly, right? So for that to happen, they need to raise a pull request. When a pull request is raised, basically a person who has the authority to do so will read through your pull request and see if whatever you have suggested is ideal or good enough, then only then he would go ahead and approve it. And once it's approved, that particular change will be merged onto the main branch or wherever the main piece of code is. So that is what a pull request is, guys. Right? So you have an option to see all the main pull requests. So when you're working with Git, right, you're usually a software developer, which is not necessary in all this case, but it usually is. So as a software developer, you'll need to be looking at pull requests. You can be creating pull requests. You can be assigning them. You can be mentioned in them, or you can have pull requests raised to you. And if you have pull requests raised to you, you can go ahead and review them and then approve them, or you can create your own and etc. All right. So that's about pull requests. Now let's go to issues. So issues are generally stuff that something goes wrong in anything, right? And if you're mentioned anywhere, since it's a collaborative platform, you can mention each other in comments and etc. All right, now let's move on to the marketplace. So marketplace is basically the place where you're going to be looking for plugins and whatnot. So as it says over here, extended GitHub. So you have extra tools at your hand, at your service for you to use. Right, so you have a lot of different tools. You have API management tools, you have chart tools, you have code quality tools that help you basically, write your code in a much better way with a lot of different options available to you. Now, a thing about these is that, these tools can either be paid or they can be, free software. Now you can just go here. You have the categories available to you. So see which category you like. You can click on filters and you can click on free trials, GitHub Enterprise, and paid. Right. So whatever version has subscription, whatever is free, right? And you can even go for verified creators if you don't want to take it from just any other guy. All right. So that's our marketplace with Git. Now another is Explore. So Explore is where you basically Git is acting as sort of Twitter or a social media platform. Sort of, not exactly. So here we're basically exploring stuff, like you're checking out, you're discovering stuff, you're just scrolling through. So you have a lot of options over here. So first, you see your profile over here, and you have how many starred repositories. And what they're going to be showing you on your main screen over here when you click on explore is basically stuff that you might like. So according to things that I've started, right? So I've started 2 repositories, and according to that, they are giving me a lot of suggestions. So I've got a suggestion for Node.js e-commerce store, and something called Kezerin 2. Now, these can be just public repositories that have no relevance to me, just being shared based on, algorithms. And a lot of different repositories that are just being shared to me for me to look through and, just check them out. Now, I can go ahead and get email updates on these 2, and you can check out the trending repositories on the side. Now, you can go to topics, and on topics, you get the option to go to specific groups where they have specific types of repositories. So once it loads, I'll give you guys the example. So if you want to go for crypto based repositories, right, so you can go ahead and check out all of them over here. So there'll be a lot of repositories that will help you do a lot of work with crypto. Now this is specifically for Bitcoin, right? Then you have for Unreal Engine, so this is for gaming, and you have Node.js, right? So you have a lot of different options. You can always check them out. Cool. So that is topics. Now you can go to trending. Trending is basically general overall repositories that are available, that are public and are just being starred a lot in the recent time. So you guys can see 157 stars today itself, 253, 262. There's a lot of repositories trending, right? And these are generally public repositories. You can even see developers, you get trending developers. And then you have collections. So collections is basically like a wiki where you have a certain set of repositories that are used to help either beginners or people starting in specific topics. So as you guys can see, text editor is a sacred tool for developers. Here's a showcase of amazingly open source editors. So you can go ahead and choose whatever editor you want, which is available in the category over here in the collection. You can learn to code over here. Somebody has created a resource for you to learn code over here. And you can check out repositories that are made just in India if you wanted to. You have an option to click on events also. And events is basically, as the name suggests, they're events that are being held with workshops. You can attend, you can listen to people. And you can see there are a few workshops coming up. Global Maintainer Summit 2021 and a lot more events, like 2 more events. All right. We have a game jam type event also. And then you have GitHub sponsors, basically people sponsoring specific things. All right, so that's our explore for us. Okay, so we have covered what these things are. Now let us go back to the homepage and let us discuss what these 3 main things are. All right, so over here we have 3 buttons. Now these are the 3 things that you'll be working with mainly. So here you have the notification bell. So if you want to read any notifications you may have, just click on that. And you have the option to add stuff over here. So if you just click on the plus. So yeah, if you click on notification, it basically takes you to your inbox and whatever notification, whatever comment is there. Now you can click on the plus option over here and you have a lot of options over here. You can create a new repository from here, import a repository from some other account, create a new gist, create a new organization, create a new project. Even within a project, you can have several repositories. That can happen. Now, so we have options to create new GitHub objects from this particular button. Now, as I said before, you can always create a new repository from that button we saw on the left-hand side in the dashboard, but you can always go ahead and click over here also. It is easier and it is always going to be available in the top bar. And then you can go ahead and click on your own user info and you'll see the profile information over here. So let me click on this and you guys can see, you can click on your profile. I'll open my profile in a new window, my repositories. I'll click on my repositories and it shows me my repositories in a lot more detailed overview. So you guys can see all my repositories. I have 22 repositories. I have a few private repositories and mostly all public repositories. You guys can go ahead and check them out. My username is Remy Code. And in overview, it basically, when somebody clicks your profile, right, this is what they're going to be seeing. So popular repositories, what people have forked most, what people have starred a lot, and these are my contributions. So the lighter it is, that means more contributions are made in that particular day. So it doesn't seem to say that I've made a lot of contribution over the past year, but that's all right. I'll be looking forward to adding more stuff. And you have more options to check out the repositories, projects, and packages over here, right? So let me just click on this profile option over here. You can set a status and you can check out your code spaces, your projects, your stars, your gists. You can even upgrade to a different version of GitHub if you want to go to the paid version. And you have more options, settings to change passwords and everything. All right. So now let's go to my profile and just show you guys what's there in my profile. Then we can go ahead and end the tour because we've covered mostly everything. Okay, so profile is basically our overview itself. When I click on repositories, it shows the repositories. Now we can just go to main dashboard. Let me close this up. We don't need that. And we'll do a short summary and then we'll move on. Okay, so as I said, guys, this is our button to click on homepage, and these are all repositories. On a quick select, we can search them. We can create a new one over here. We can create an organization new one, and we can check our, generally our interaction with other people regarding our repositories, notification based on that. We have option to see our pull requests, our issues, marketplace for new tools, and explore to check out the different things like Twitter, where you're checking out different people's repositories, you're checking the trending stuff, different topics, any events, and etc. All right, you have the option to check the notifications and your inbox. Click on it to go into more detail, create all the GitHub objects from here, and check out your profile and all your settings and your repositories from here. All right, guys, now we'll be going ahead and working with GitHub. So there are a few things I want to cover over here. So things like creating a new repository, then understanding how to commit a change, and then basically learning how to create a branch and what branches are, and finally we'll go ahead and end by learning how to create a pull request. All right, so let us start. So the first thing over here is creating a new repository. So guys, we're gonna click on new over here. Again, you have an option to click on the plus and click on new, but we're just gonna click on new over here. Now, creating a new repository. So as I had told you guys earlier, a repository contains all the project files, including revision history, right? So basically, they're all relevant files that logically make sense, right, in one particular location. So if you're a food delivery app, then you create a food delivery repository. So now let's go ahead and create our own repository. So you can go ahead and change the owner if you have multiple accounts, and now the owner remains the same. Now repository name. So let's give it an appropriate repository name. So let me call this GitHub GL tutorial. All right. Cool. So it actually checks if the GitHub repository name is available or not. If it's not available, it'll ask you to change the name. So it is available. So we're going to move on. Now this needs a description. So you can always give a description to your repository for other people to see what it is. So here I'm going to mention this is a test repository to help people understand how to use GitHub. All right. So once I've written the description, now I can move on. So after you've written the description, the next option for you to choose is whether you want your repository to be public or whether you want it to be private. Now, it is important to understand the distinction over here. So public means that anyone on the internet can see this repository, right? You can choose, you still get to choose who commits to your repository. Whereas with private, you can choose who sees the repository and commit to the repository. So the difference here is that public means it's available for everyone to look at, but not touch. And private means that no one can look at unless you want them to look at, and still people can't touch it unless you want people to touch it. All right. So the choice here is dependent on your requirement. So if you're working for a company, it's generally going to be a private repository, right? You don't want your code to be seen by other people or other people from other companies. But if you want your code to be open source and for other people to look at and enjoy, then you can go ahead and make it public, right? So it really depends on how you want it to be. So once you've done that, you have an option to initialize this repository with a few starter things, right? So a few starter things can be adding a README file. So what is a README file? A README file is a very basic file that gives a good brief description of what your project does. So it's kind of like the description, but it goes a little bit more into detail. And this is a file that is a part of your code. So if anyone ever downloads or clones your repository onto their system, they'll have a README file. Right? It's not just a metadata, it is an actual file. So I do want a README file so that, people will be able to check out my README file. Now, there are a few more options. That is a .gitignore. Now, what is this file? So this file is used when you want certain things in your folder not to be considered when you're staging. So that's why I told you guys about the Git lifecycle. So in Git lifecycle, when you're on your laptop or on your PC and you're working in your local repository, you might have 10 files, but you only want to stage 3 files because only those 3 files are relevant. The other 10 files or the other 7 files aren't that important and don't need to be tracked. So what you can do is you can just include them in your .gitignore. So that way, everything gets ignored that is inside this file when you want to stage things. All right. So right now we don't need this. Choose a license. Yeah, we can go ahead and choose a license. So licensing basically tells others what they can and they can't do with our code. So if you want people to be able to use your code for any purpose at all, just go with an MIT license. So this gives people the right to basically use your code for any purpose they see fit. This is the philosophy of open source, right? Now you can have certain changes in that. You can look through which license suits you the best. You have a lot of different license, that you can use. So MIT license even means they can use your code for commercial purposes or whatnot. Okay, so now that we're done with all of this, we can go ahead and click on create a repository. You can review it once and then click on create a repository. And we'll start creating the repository for you. All right. So once we have created a repository, this is what you guys are going to see. Now, this is another sort of dashboard. This is your repository dashboard, right? So it tells you everything about that repository. So you guys can see a lot of stuff over here. Let me go through all of these things one by one. We'll start off with this thing because this is the most important part. This is where all of your files are generally going to be. And we are in dark mode right now. If you guys are noticing the difference, that is because I have dark mode enabled. If you want, you can go ahead and change that to light mode, or you guys can want to change it to dark mode. Now, as you guys can see over here, we have 2 files, license file and the read.me file, right? So readme.md file. So we can always go ahead and change the file, and you can see the readme.md file has appeared over here. So you can go ahead and make changes over here. You can add more stuff, and the description is a part of it. So I can add more stuff saying that, hey guys, hope you are having a nice day learning about GitHub. Here is a quick tip. Always give a relevant commit message. All right, so that's what I wanted. Now I can go ahead and commit the changes. Now again, guys, committing the changes means saving those changes. So this is me basically committing a new version of the readme.md file. Now I can commit directly to main branch. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll tell you guys what branches are. So just commit this. So as you guys can see, I went contrary to my tip over here. I did not give a commit message, but don't worry. The reason I didn't give it because I want to go back over here and show you how to do it by using actual code. Okay, so you guys can see we have two files over here. Now, so what we will do now is we're going to go ahead and click on add a file and click on create new file. So you can go ahead and upload files over here. This gives you the option to click and drag and drop different files from your system onto GitHub repositories. But normally when you're working and pulling and pushing code, you just make use of Git command line interface commands. You don't use this option, basically because it's a little bit tedious and that is much more easier. But now what we're going to do is we're just working with GitHub. We're not working with Git. So I'm going to click on create a new file. Okay. So this will give me the option to add a new file over here. Okay, guys. So first we're going to give this a name. I'm going to give this index.html. And then we're going to go ahead and give some sample code. So I'm going to write HTML and then I'm going to write title. We can say, this is my awesome website. I'm going to end the title. Then we can include a header tag. And I'm going to go ahead and write, welcome to my awesome website. All right, so there we have it. We have added all the necessary things. Now I'm going to go ahead and close this. Okay, so very simple and basic code. I'm going to go ahead and write over here created index.html, and we can go ahead and add some extended description if you want. I'm going to leave it be. And you guys will see commit directly to main branch and create a new branch on this commit. I'll explain to you what a new branch is, but for now, we're going to go ahead and stick to commit to main branch. I'm going to click on commit new file. And you guys can see it starts loading. So we'll just wait for it to finish loading. All right. So you guys can see now we have a new file that has been added to our repository. So guys, this is how you can go ahead and add a new file and commit it, right? So when you create a new file, you're committing a change itself because you're adding new stuff. When you make a change, for say, let's say I go to index.html and I try and edit this, that means I'll be making another commit. So this means this is going to be another version of my software. Okay, so here we can go ahead and add more things. If I just press enter and we add a p tag. Okay, so we added a new line. Let me go ahead and add this. Added a p tag. And again, guys, remember that you have to make it relevant. I'm going to go ahead and then commit the change. All right, so with the commit added, we can go ahead and commit the changes. So let us just click on commit changes and we'll see that our second commit has been made. And you guys can see over here that my change has now reflecting over here, right? So that's great. We have one contributor, and if you want to check our commit history, we can always go to the history over here, right? So the last commit was made 21 seconds ago. So let me just head to my repository main. So just going back and we'll see how we can look at the commits in general. Okay. So we have an option over here to click on history itself from here. And if you want, you can go ahead and edit it and add another commit so that you can see 3 commits. This is just a simulation of how things could be, right? All right. So with that out of the way, let me show you guys. So as you can see, there are 4 commits over here. Let's click on it and let's see who made those 4 commits. All right. So we can see there are 4 commits over here. So there's an initial commit. Then we have the readme update. Then we have created index.html. And we have added a p tag to the index.html. And all of those changes have been made to the main branch. Now, what are branches? So let's get this clear. So branches, guys, are basically something that allow us to invert the branch of a software project, right? So let's say you have 4 or 5 people working on the same project. would it be easy for all 4-5 people to work on the same project at the same time? It wouldn't be that easy. So we have a concept called branching, in which you take the software and you branch it off in different branches. So it's basically you taking the main code and creating branches of it. So these branches contain the same code the main branch has, but they might be additions or deletions in them. Now, these additions and deletions are done in order for us to introduce new concepts, right? So if you want to add a new function, or if you want to add a new library itself, you create a new branch and you add it there, and then you take that branch and you bring it back into the main branch. So for example, I have main branch over here, and I can go ahead and add a new branch. So let's say that I want function A, right? So we don't have any function A right now, but I can go ahead and click on create branch function A, right? So it says creating function A from main. So what it's going to do is it's going to copy everything there is in main and transfer it over to function A branch. So it's basically main branch and a side twig coming out, which is called function A, which will have everything that main has, but it can have more additions to it. So if I quickly go ahead and add a new file to it, and we'll add a very simple statement so that we can quickly show you how it really works out. So let's say that this is code for function A, all right? And let me just call it function.html, right? Function A.html. Now I'm going to come back, created function A. I'm going to click on commit new file. So this way we're committing a new file, but you guys will see that we are committing directly to function A branch, right? So we have made a commit, but in function A branch. So right now, if we go and switch to main branch over here, you guys will see that function A.html is not in the main branch. Why is this so? Because it's a branch of the main branch. Function A is not main. It's a twig coming out of the main branch. So whatever changes you make here will not reflect in your main branch unless you merge them back. Okay. So when you merge them back, right, all the changes that you made in function A will now reflect in your main branch. So that's why we like to use branches, because it allows a lot of people to work on the same project a lot more easier. So when you are actually raising a pull request, what you're doing is you have your own branch, and from your own branch, you want some changes to be made to the main branch, and someone has to approve that. And that's where your pull request comes in. All right. So how do we do that pull request? How do we raise a pull request? So the easy way to do it is just click on compare and pull request, right? So it's already giving us an option because it detected it by itself. But first, let's look at the two branches. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on two branches over here. And you guys can see all the overview over here. So the default branch was updated 7 minutes ago, and our branch was updated 3 minutes ago, right? So what we can do is we can go ahead and click on a new pull request, okay? Or you can just go to pull requests, and over there, you can click on new pull requests. Now, so over here, we can see that base, main, and comparing function A. So what is happening now is that function A is being compared to main. Now it's checking for any merge conflicts. So sometimes when you merge two files and there are contents for some files have been changed that are used to, that should be same, then you have a conflict. In our case, there was no conflict and we are able to merge. So right now what we can do is we can go ahead and click on write. So I as a developer one just saying that completed function A, please review. All right. So we're going to do that. And then I'm going to click on create pull request. So once I create the pull request, right. So we can go ahead and see that a new pull request has been created. So we can see in pull request, we have one option here available, the notification over here. So, right. So now the owner of the main branch or owner of the repository has the option to approve it or not. So as the owner, you can go ahead and check the commits as a senior developer or whatever. So you can go ahead and compare the files. So you can click the commit and check out what was the change that was made. You can go through the change. And if you have any comments you want to make, you can go ahead and leave that comment and you can approve it directly from here if you want. Then you can come back if you haven't approved. And this is where you'll be basically approving all of the merge pull requests. So I can just click on merge pull requests, right? So I can go ahead and confirm merge. Now there are different kinds of merge. We won't be going into all the different kinds of merges in this video, but this is how it is. All right. So now we have successfully merged our branches. Okay. So with that out of the way, we can come back to code. And you guys can see that now we have function a.html as a part of the main branch. All right. Okay. So guys, that was our course or tutorial on GitHub. All right. So I hope you guys understood what was taught to you. Now, let me do a quick summary of what we went through over here. So we basically learned what GitHub is. We learned what is Git. We understood what version control is, why it is important. We understood what is the difference between Git and GitHub. What are the features of Git? What is the life cycle of Git and GitHub? And how do they work together? Then we learned how to, create an account on GitHub. Then we went on and learned all the different things about GitHub. What are the different features? We learned there are pull requests, marketplace, exploring. That is kind of like Twitter. So you're just checking out different repositories, and you can go to profile, check notifications, add new objects, blah blah blah. And then we learn how to create a new repository, learn how to add a new file, commit changes to it, go through the commits, create a new branch, and then merge a pull request. All right. So that was our tutorial on GitHub, guys. Thank you so much for watching.
I want to introduce you to Great Learning Academy, a free initiative by Great Learning. You can access over 200 plus courses with 1,000 plus hours of free content on trending high demand domains. Absolutely free. Register now to complete the course and get your free certificate of completion. Check out the link in the description of the video below. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, I want to request you to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notifications bell so that you don't miss out on any new updates or video releases from Great Learning. If you enjoyed this video, show us some love and like this video. Knowledge increases by sharing, so make sure you share this video with your friends and colleagues. And make sure to comment on the video for any queries or suggestions, and I will respond to them.